This video is about the ZOLEO satellite communication device. Only a few years ago I was adamant I didn't want a SATCOM device. I didn't want to contact anyone when I was on wilderness trips, and I really didn't want them to contact me because it felt like it would be an intrusion into my secluded escape. And I was just too stubborn and cheap to pay for one, and now just a few years later, looking back on that, I can't believe how inexperienced and young, cocky, arrogant, stubborn, all those adjectives come to mind when I think about that decision, because there was one day that changed everything. Basically what happened was Erin and I were a few months into dating. We built our first Quincy, like a snow cave, and slept in it overnight. I told her that I loved her for the first time, and she said it back. So, you know, that's just, you're feeling like on cloud nine. At the time we lived 3 hours apart, so we winter camped somewhere in between us. She went north, I went south, and that's where things went wrong. We used forestry roads to get to this camping spot, and there's no signal for a long ways. Both of us had to drive an hour before we got back to signal, essentially. And we did this regularly to get to one another at the time, and we had a system where you checked in at either end just to say, okay, I've left, and then the other person knows like a timeline of when you should get to the other side. So I got to the other side and I checked in. She didn't. I knew her cell phone battery was low, so I figured it died and she'd check in as soon as she got home. I was a bit apprehensive, but like there was no reason for panic yet. I get home and another hour passes and she still hasn't checked in. She said she might get groceries on the way home, so like I have a bit of rationale for why she might be late, but like a sense of worry is definitely building. I contacted Erin's friends in Geraldton and they checked her house and the grocery store, no sign of her. I asked Kessia, Erin's sister, hadn't had any word from her, and immediately I knew something was wrong, and that horrible sense of dread start to set in. I contacted the Ontario Provincial Police, who agreed that there was cause for concern, and they listed her as a missing person right away and sent a patrol car. They ordered me to stay put and within cell phone signal because they might need information from me, which was extremely difficult to stay put during that time, but the cop car would get there first anyway. When the OPP got to her truck, it was upside down and she wasn't in it.
This just happened. Yeah, I just hit some ice and lost control. Hit the bank and went over. It was pretty scary. My stuff's scattered in there. Luckily I've got a lot of warm clothes, so I'm just gonna hang out. I'm still 60 miles from service, so yeah, I'll hang out until someone comes this way.
She had hit an icy corner probably 10 minutes after we parted ways, which meant she had been there on the side of the road for about 4 hours before anyone came by on this remote road. Thankfully a couple of guys were out for a Sunday drive and they picked her up and got her back to the highway, back to signal. And those 4 hours were the longest of my life. Thankfully, it was only around freezing that day, but like imagine it had been minus 30, which regularly happens here in the winter. Or imagine she had rolled into an open river and had escaped but was now soaked and hypothermic. 4 hours would have been too late. And this wasn't even wilderness, like in the sense that, you know, a car could pass by. Imagine you're on a wilderness trip, no car is going to come by. You're just on your own. And sometimes we think, oh, I could survive a broken ankle or, you know, something external, but what if it's internal? What if you get appendicitis? That can be fatal if it's not dealt with. So mercifully, Erin was okay aside from whiplash and a bit of a concussion, but that prompted us to get a PLB, which is just an SOS button. So you can trigger an emergency response to your location, but there's no weather, there's no messaging, there's no communication of any kind, no check-ins. So this too I realized was a mistake, and I was still cheaping out. A couple of months later we went on an 8-day wilderness trip that was very rugged. We were beaten down and running behind schedule, and we were really worried at the time that we were going to miss our check-in with Erin's parents and that they would call in search and rescue. Even though we were okay, we did not need search and rescue. We were just running a little behind schedule because of the difficulty. And we also really could have used weather forecasts on that trip because the weather was really tough, and not knowing made that extra challenging. We had no cell signal, of course. So the PLB was good peace of mind if there was like a life or death emergency, but we were coming to realize that it was not the right device for our kinds of trips. Later that year, I was on a solo trip on a very rugged exploratory route, and I was paranoid the whole time that I was going to be late because it started off really bad. There were log jams after log jams, and I was just paranoid that I was going to be late and Erin was going to be freaking out, calling search and rescue needlessly. All I needed was more time. All I needed was a button to check in and say I'm okay, and I didn't have that. On that trip I was also hit by an unexpected snowstorm. We almost never have signal to check weather on our trips, so if we're on a week-long trip we get a weather forecast before, and every day it gets less and less accurate. So there are times like that where I would kill for a weather forecast, and not just snow but lightning, strong winds, so many other weather conditions can play a huge factor, and to get an updated forecast several days or a week into a trip is just invaluable. So those are some of the experiences that led to us getting this ZOLEO device, and I just wanted to share them because I think a lot of other people will have the same thought process, like it's not going to happen to me. It can. I don't want to pay for it. It's not very much money for considering how much benefit it can provide if you really need it. Not to mention you can suspend it for $5 a month when you don't need it. So it really doesn't have to be a costly thing. You can get the most basic plan. And if your other objection is that you just don't want to be in contact with people in wilderness, I get that. Just turn it off. Only turn it on if you really want to check in. You can just hit the check-in button. You don't even have to say hello to anyone if that's your beef. You can just give people that peace of mind back home, people who love you, and you can know that they're not worrying about you, which is nice as well. They don't know if you're having the best day ever or you're in desperate need of help. So that's why we ended up getting this. In the next video, I will talk about why we chose the ZOLEO and what it does.